Hello, model railroad enthusiast. I'm Walt, and welcome to WaltWorld. Hello and welcome back to my channel for another episode of WaltWorld. This is episode 2 of 2017. So we're going to pick up where we left off last time before we were interrupted by the Sparky shout out. Hope you enjoyed that. And continue to talk about some of my initial ideas I have about my track plan and some requirements I'm trying to put together as I start putting together some real plans for the new layout. So let's get started. What we're going to start off with is I thought I would share with you the kind of the dimensions of the layout room. I've got the basic studs of some of the walls put together that I'm still building the layout room, but this is what the area looks like. It's about 350 square feet in the back end of my basement. As you can see, it's kind of like a bowling alley. It's long. The length of this is about 37.5 feet. The widest area over here under the turret is about 12 3/4 feet, and then the normal rest of the width here is about 8.5 feet. So that's pretty good space, I think, for the layout room. Something we'll have to work around, of course, or it does have two doors. There's a door that will comes in from my workshop, and then there'll be another door that goes into the rest of the basement. So I'll have to work around those. But I thought this was a reasonable space to model, and gives me some nice long runs for my layout. Also looking at this as far as the bench work, because of the doors, I want to work around that. I'm thinking about maybe putting a layout, something from a bench work point of view, something like this. This is just a crude kind of idea with a kind of a turnaround peninsula here at the far end. And also, if I make this is if this is a single deck layout. If I make it a double deck layout, I probably will put a helix down at this other end. Anyway, let me know, give me some feedback on what you think about that use of the space. I think this would give me some good aisle space and a reasonably long, nice operating railroad, especially if I end up making it a double deck with possibly then staging underneath. But this is the kind of area I'm playing with. I just thought I'd share that with you. So continuing on with looking at some of the the wants now, some of my trade-off decisions for my new layout. My first part of the list here is I call trade-off decisions, kind of a choice between different things. So the first choice is it a freelance railroad or is it a prototype railroad? And while I really do appreciate the prototypical kinds of railroads and actually modeling something that's real and recreating that, I'm going to make mine a freelance railroad. My last one was, to me, it's part of the creative process that I really enjoy, is just creating everything, the cities, the industries, and just kind of creating that whole fiction and narrative. So this will be a freelance railroad. The next choice is whether it's going to be a DC or DCC layout. Now, my last layout I had was a DC layout, and I enjoyed that. I actually had a really good working central control center, and then I had a walk-along cab. But I'm going to try DCC this time. I've actually bought and purchased a couple of DCC engines, locomotives already, so that's what we're going to do this time. And then the third choice here is it going to be a single main line track, or is it going to be a double main line track? And I'm going to go with a single main line track here, in that I think double main lines are great, but they take up a lot more real estate, and obviously they cost more. But I also think that for kind of the layout that I'm doing, a single main line will be just fine, and also give me some more challenges in the switching department, in the operations department, if you only have a single main to work with. So anyway, these are just some kind of some of my initial trade-off decisions. Continuing on, what I had defined as my railroad narrative, since I've already defined this as a freelance railroad, I figured, okay, let's start writing the fictional narrative. And the first thing is going to be, what's the railroad name? And I've come up with, this is going to be called the Winchester and Chillicothe Railroad. no magic and reason for that other than the WC. My first name's Walt, my wife's first name is Cindy, so this is the WC Railroad. But I also, Winchester, the towns of Winchester, Kentucky, and Chillicothe, Ohio, actually have some significance in my childhood, so I thought, oh, those are kind of cool towns, and I still remember driving through Chillicothe with the big pulp and paper factories there and smelling it. But anyway, it's just too much information, but that's why I'm going to call this the Winchester and Chillicothe Railroad. The next one is the time period, and I'm going to do a very popular period that everybody else likes to do, as most everybody else to do, versus the modern. I know a lot of people do modern, but I'm going to stick with the 1940s and 50s since that's kind of a lot of the rolling stock that I've already collected. So it's not going to be nailed down to a precise time period, but somewhere in the 40s and 50s. And what are we hauling on this railroad? Well, I enjoy doing both passenger and freight service, so we're gonna make accommodations for both. And then finally, what kind of equipment? Of course, again, kind of goes with the 1940s and 50s. I have a lot of steam equipment, but also I can envision maybe doing some early diesel. So that's kind of my initial cut at creating a narrative for my railroad, the Winchester and Chillicothe Railroad. So let me know what you think about that. So continuing on here, kind of on my layout want list, I'm thinking about that. I wanted to make this point-to-point for operations' sake, but as like a lot of people, if there's a way I can design this for a continuous run, that would be enjoyable too, because there are just times when you just want to go down and let the trains run and not have to worry about turning around and all that kind of stuff, or just having the ability when people stop by just to, again, show some trains running without having to worry about, trains running off at the end. So anyway, that's on my want list. It's absolutely not a must, but this is on my want list. I also enjoy a variety of scenes, multiple locations and industries that will support my switching operations for operations' sake, and just again kind of make it interesting. Two scenes that I really do kind of enjoy modeling would be the kind of the contrast. So maybe on one end of the railroad maybe more of a mountain scenery, and the other end maybe definitely be more of a big city kind of scenery. And then of course kind of then fill it in between, but those are the kind of two scenes that I kind of enjoy. So that's kind of on my want list. Then I also on my want list would like to find a way to design in kind of for day and nighttime operations. Certainly, obviously it'd be daytime operations, but if there's a way I can put in some extra lights or such to do some dimming and sunsets and that type of thing in order to do nighttime operations. Since I always like to put lights in my buildings, I think that looks cool, so I'm going to put that on my want list as well. And then one of my subscribers put this on in my feedback session from my last video, was to think about train room atmosphere, and that's a good point, so that's why I wrote it down. But I haven't thought through kind of what that means yet, or what I'm going to do to accommodate maybe some different ideas in the train room atmosphere. But I thought that was at least a good point, and I appreciate him giving me that feedback. All right, next is going to be my want list. I put this in more of the category of some of the design features of the layout, and the first one is going to be for easy access. So what that means to me is no lift outs or duck unders, if I can at all avoid that. And as I showed on my layout room, I have two doors I have to contend with, which is why I kind of came up with that initial view of how maybe the bench work would go, so I could avoid the doors and not having to do lift outs or duck unders, which is if I did a complete around the room kind of layout, I would definitely have to deal with that. And to me, that just kind of interferes with the access. And, as we get older, you just don't want to be crawling under things if I don't have to. Also kind of designed it I like to design it for at least a minimum of 4-foot aisleway, just again, so that we're not crammed into if I'm doing operations, having to crowd past people and knock stuff over. So if I can have a little bit more ample space, and a couple of layouts that I showed in my videos, layout tours this summer, as you could see, some of them had some really tight spaces, and others had some really nice aisles, and I really didn't like those wide aisles. So I put that on my want list. Also, I'm going to minimize the use of supports and legs that to me kind of create foot obstacles. So I'm just going to see if I can make the bench work as clean as possible. Obviously it's going to be strong, but just if there's a way I can design it so that don't have a lot of extra obstacles for feet to trip over. And then, clearly want to make sure that I would like to have a lot of tunnels, but obviously you need to make sure it's accessible so that in an event of stalls or even just easy track cleaning, that you have an ability to get in there and access that area. So I just put that on my list so I don't forget about it. Then specifically on the track, I'm designing it for a minimum of 24-inch radius. So all the steam engines that I have basically have a 22-inch radius minimum. So I figured if I make my minimum 24, then that gives me 2 inches of margin. I think a lot of the turns I'm starting to play with will be bigger than that, but this would kind of gives me my minimum of 24 inches. I think I can easily accommodate that. And then a maximum of 3% incline. Preferably it would be less than that, but again, this is my maximum. And which if I have a helix or something like that, I'll have to contend with some more of those kinds of issues. But I wrote this down as something I didn't want to forget about and try to make sure I design it for less than that. Since I said I'm going to have passenger traffic, I'm designing my sidings and passenger sidings and stations and such for 6 Pullman passenger cars would be the maximum. Clearly, I could easily do 10 or 12, but then that takes up a lot of real estate. And so for the 40s and 50s kind of time frame I'm modeling, I figured 6 passenger cars plus a locomotive is plenty long passenger train. So it's just as I design my stations, that's what I'm kind of looking for, is a maximum of 6 passenger cars. And then from the freight sidings and such, again, I'm kind of looking at an average of 10 to 12, somewhere in that neighborhood of 40-foot freight cars is kind of what I'm looking for. Again, I may have real estate to do some longer yards, but that's kind of what I want to make sure that I can accommodate those kinds of trains. I clearly like watching some of the big club layouts that have 60 cars going around and massive trains. Those are always fun to watch, but in practicality, I don't think I will accommodate those kinds of trains. But I thought this was at least a reasonable number to put down. Give me your feedback and tell me what you think. And then on the track code, I have a ton of Code 100 Shinohara track and switches that are left over from my last layout. I just did everything. It was just easier to buy a bunch of Shinohara. They make good switches and had good flex tracks, so I just had standard Code 100 on my layout and never had any issue with it. So I still have a ton of that. I'm thinking this time again, just to be maybe a little bit more representative, and again, this is a want, not a must, I may try to go on the main line and some of the main kind of towns and stuff. I'm going to try to go with Code 83, and then I may, if I can, use then all the Code 100 stuff I have. I can use that in my staging area, or just some of the kind of maybe areas that are not as visible, maybe, so I have to play with that. But anyway, that's kind of what I'm thinking about on the track code. All right, continuing on with some of these design features. Then we talk about bench work, and as I mentioned, I kind of want to make it obviously strong, and I want it rigid, and I want it stable. And we get very temperature variations and things like that. My last bench that I built for my last layout was in 2x4s, and man, it was bomb-proof. It was not moving. It was solid, and and I could stand and jump on it, and it was not moving. I'm going to try to make this a little bit more elegant than just a bunch of 2x4s, but I really do want it strong, and I want it stable so that it's not messing up the track too much with all the temperature swings and things like that. So that's kind of at least on my want list. I would like to make it kind of low profile, especially if I'm thinking about doing a multiple level layout. If it's a single level layout, I'm not too worried about it, but if I'm really kind of leaning to a multiple level layout, and if I do that, I really want to minimize the bench work profile, let's say, and that way maximize my vertical space between the benches so that I'm not too crammed in there. So anyway, I got to think about that, and so I just wrote that down on my want list. And then also, this is another one, but we'll see how that works out, is have it designed so it can be dismantled in the event of a move. Now, I want it to be solid, right? I want it to be rigid, strong, so it's got to be really mounted. But on the other hand, if there's a way I can build it so that it's just a little easier in the event of a move. My last layout, as I mentioned, was in 2x4s, and it was solid, and I thought I had made it somewhat dismantled, be able to dismount, but at the same time, when I had to move pretty quickly. I ended up damaging a lot of stuff. Just, I guess invariably you have to, the way switches cross benches, and, the track, and gets the way it is. And so I just wanted to see if there's a way I can design it. At least maybe, I don't plan to move, but how life gets in your way sometimes. So if there's a way I can design it to make it a little easier to move without destroying or damaging the layout, I'm going to try to consider that. As I mentioned before, I'm looking at double deck layouts, and this, I'm just looking at this really to enhance operations and increase the mainline runs, and kind of double the space of my layout. So let's put that on my want list. Again, it's not a hard and fast, and I got to give that some more thought. Definitely would like to create a staging area for operations as well as train storage. The layouts I visited that have that, I think that's a great feature. So I'm thinking about putting that, some kind of staging area underneath the main deck, or somehow accommodate that, but definitely is on my want list. And then, of course, if I do a double deck layout or multi-level layout, I'm going to need a helix, as I showed on my layout or my diagram. I'm kind of thinking on that one end is a good place where I could put a helix, but that way allow me to connect the lower staging along with the two operational levels of the layout. All right, well, that's pretty much that list for this go around on my wants. What have I forgotten, and what did I miss, or am I messing up on? Anyway, give me your feedback and let me know. Anyway, I really do appreciate you checking into my channel, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you.